Hello, everyone. My name is Angie Hambrick. I'm the Associate Vice President of Diversity, Justice, and Sustainability and the Director of the Center for Gender Equity. And I'm really excited to have this dope panel of faculty to talk about this year's common reading text, The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. So just a little bit of what we're going to do today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about why we're having this panel. What is the point of the five of us having this conversation about this text that we know that you all have read or listened to on the audios or have even watched the movie? That's, legit. We just want you to be able to engage in the themes of the text. And then I'm going to give our faculty panel the opportunities to talk about what it means to engage with the text, and especially at PLU during this time in our world. So I want to start off with thinking about lenses, right? So here are my glasses. These are my favorite pair of glasses. I usually get a new pair of glasses like every other year because I have to wear them. I wear them constantly. The only time I take off my glasses is when I sleep and shower. A lot of information for y'all that you might not need to know. But the point is, I can't function without my lenses, my glasses, right? So in my glasses, there are these lenses that I hope not to break. But my lenses help me see. They help me see the world. They help me see the writing that's in front of me. They're helping me to actually be able to function in some way because I need them to be able to see. But my lenses are also, I can think about my glasses and my lenses also as a way that I can see the world. So in my glass lenses, you can think about different parts of who you are and your identity. So for me, some of the ways that I see the world and the lenses through which I see the world is as a Black woman, as a parent, as a mom. I have a almost 3-year-old little Black boy. So being a parent of a Black mom. Another piece of my lens is just finishing my PhD. Yup, got through that PhD school grind. So I feel what y'all about to go through right now for the first semester of school. Being an educator, being someone who loves big earrings and who has dreadlocks, like all these things make up my lenses and help me understand how I function and see the world. And also how, honestly, other people kind of see me and the ways that they believe that I should function and see the world. So it kind of goes both ways. So one of the lenses that you all now have coming into PLU is that you are now a PLU student. You might be a first year, you might be a transfer student, you're coming in with credits, but you are now a part of the PLU learning community. So that is now a new piece of your lens in the way that you're going to engage and see the world. So what we're going to do today with this panel is talk about different lenses that the panelists have. So they have a disciplinary lens, which we'll talk about what that means, but they also have all these other lenses, pieces of their lenses that I talked about, that I mentioned, as being parents, as being fur baby owners, pet dog, cat owners, as being faculty members, as being white folks. All these things kind of color how we see the world. So we're going to talk about that as well, and about how all these lenses help us understand our common reading text, The Hate You Give. So I want to introduce the folks that we're going to be talking to today. First is Dr. Kate Luther. Professor Luther is an associate professor of sociology and criminal justice, and she's also the chair of that department. So, hey, Kate.
Hi. Awkward Zoom wave.
Yes. I know. Where should you look? Should you look at me at the camera? I don't know.
I don't know.
Next is Professor Marnie Ritchie. Dr. Ritchie is the assistant professor of communication. Hey, Marnie.
Hey.
Next is Dr. Mike Rings. Professor Rings is a resident assistant professor of philosophy. Hey, Mike. And finally is my partner in crime and my homie who does all this common reading stuff with me, Dr. Paul Sutton. Professor Sutton is an assistant professor of education. Hey, Paul. All right, so we want to start our conversation thinking about what a disciplinary lens is. So that's might be some new language to some folks, like what does it mean to actually be in a discipline and what is a discipline? So could each of you, starting maybe with Mike, because that's the first name I saw on my list, can you describe and define what is your discipline? What does it mean to study philosophy?
Thanks, Dr. Hambrick. Yeah, so as Dr. Hambrick mentioned, disciplinary lens is philosophy. And it's a tough thing to define. Philosophers like to say the question of what philosophy is itself a philosophical question. So it's hard to pin down to an annoying degree, maybe. But it derives from the Greek words that adding up mean the love of wisdom, sometimes translated as the love of truth. So very roughly, very crudely, we could call philosophy the critical study of fundamental truths about all kinds of things, about the nature of the universe, of existence, of consciousness, of humanity, of human experience, and of the particular areas that I'm involved in, the nature of value, values. There's a subfield called value theory, and within that there are subfields of ethics, which deals with values of morality, so questions of moral right and wrong, of moral goodness and badness or evil, and it deals with questions like how should we act, how should we treat one another, what sort of lives should we strive to lead, what sort of people should we strive to be. On the other hand, there are different sorts of values that I deal with as someone that's works in aesthetics. And so that would be aesthetic values like beauty versus ugly and everything in between that we, pin to artworks, works of art like The Hate U Give, most commonly maybe, but also natural phenomena, things like trees and mountains and sunsets. So that's the lens and little sub-lenses with which I work as my disciplinary focus.
How about you, Marnie?
Yes, so I am in the Department of Communication at PLU and going into my third year here now. And at PLU, communication is broken down into 3 different sub-disciplines. So we have civic engagement, film and new media, and then strategic communication. And those cover all sorts of different forms of communication. In media studies in particular, which I'm teaching Intro to Media Studies this fall, and it's a class I love teaching. Media studies is a really interdisciplinary field, and you're seeing a lot now of an uptake of more Black studies within media studies as well, especially thinking about things like Twitter, right, and social movements in our current age. So communication is fundamentally the study of persuasive discourses that induce our actions and affect our attitudes.
Thanks. How about you, Kate?
Thanks, Angie. So as Angie mentioned, I'm in the Department of Sociology and Criminal Justice. So I come to this book from 2 lenses, primarily as a sociologist, but also a sociologist trained in criminology and criminal justice. So sociology is the scientific study of how humans behave and interact and organizations. And on the other hand, criminology is the scientific study of the nature of crime, the causes of crimes, like theories of crime, and the ways that we control crime. So I was really thrilled to look at this book through both of these disciplinary lenses.
And Paul.
Thanks, Angie. So I come at this book through the lens of an educator. And education is kind of a catch-all in some cases of different disciplines. So we draw a lot from fields like sociology, from fields like neuroscience and learning theory, increasingly from fields like critical race theory, and in some cases even fields like philosophy. And so when I kind of look at the world through that lens, and especially this book, I'm always thinking about ways in which the site of schools and serve as ways to acculturate and acculturate folks into society, whether it's norms or rules or just ways in which schools help folks understand what their role is in a democracy and in our diverse democracy.
So I'm going to simplify this, and it's going to be real simple, but what I heard was philosophy and fundamental truths, media studies and persuasion, sociology and criminology, human behavior and theories of crime, and education, almost like an interdisciplinary approach. So taking pieces of all these disciplines to kind of understand and make meaning of the impacts that schools have on bodies. So thinking about all those things, what were some of the main ideas and themes or stuff that stuck out to you from your disciplinary lens as you were reading The Hate U Give?
Well, I guess I'll start. So as a with my disciplinary lenses coming in, what really struck me was the really compelling and difficult moral dilemma at the heart of the book. Well, and I think there are multiple moral dilemmas we see the characters grappling with, but obviously the central one is Starr struggling with the decision of whether or not and also when and how to come forward as a witness, as the witness to Khalil's murder. And, in this way, it shares a lot, I think, with a lot of great works of literature and narrative art. Moral dilemmas, we find these often at the heart of plots because they're really compelling. They really suck us in. And just to define our terms, in philosophy, we're a bit obsessive about defining our terms. What is a moral dilemma, right? A dilemma on the one hand is a very difficult choice that someone's faced with where all of the options are in some way problematic. They involve some kind of risk of loss or pain, right? You're kind of between a rock and a hard place. No matter which you choose, it's gonna hurt, right? And with a moral dilemma, there's some risk of moral loss or moral suffering. So something of deep kind of moral significance can be lost by any of the options. Starr is faced with the decision of, do I do justice to Khalil by coming forward and speaking the truth? Do I do justice to him, to myself, to my community, to other people of color, and marginalized peoples who are being impacted by things like white supremacy and police violence? But that carries a risk, of course, right? We see the very real risks, not only to herself, right, becoming a hashtag, as she puts it, but risks to her family and her loved ones, right? The police openly threaten her father. The King Lords threaten her father and her family. And we see, right, when she does choose to come forward, there is loss, right? The burning down of her father's store at the hands of the King Lords. But if she chooses to avoid those risks and to stay silent, there's of course risk of pain and loss there, right? And that's what we see her really struggling with. That's her internal struggle. She thinks Khalil would come forward in a second if the roles were reversed. If I don't do this, I'm letting Khalil down, I'm letting myself down, I'm letting my community down. I'm not doing what's right and what's just. So that's the very difficult dilemma she's faced with, which of course is compounded and made even more difficult by this complex social situation she's in, where she's kind of straddling two worlds, right? The kind of white world of the affluent school that her parents send her to, with the more black world of her community, and all of the relationships that she has to navigate between those worlds, with her friends, with her boyfriend, with her family. What I was really struck by with this novel was thinking about how specific her dilemma is, and how, even though this novel is very universal in that any reader, including myself, a white middle-aged cisgender male, can identify with her problems and with her situation, it's something that she finds herself in largely, or she would not find herself in were she not a young woman of color in America right now. So I came away with really thinking that what the novel does nicely is illustrate a specific kind of racial injustice, which I would want to call the injustice of moral burden, because of the very difficult, unjust social structures that Star and other people of color may find themselves in due to their identity. They might find themselves placed in positions like this, where they have to make these very difficult choices between things like, on the one hand, doing what's just and speaking the truth, on the other hand, securing their own personal safety. Things that we would hope no one should have to sacrifice for the sake of the other. That's a moral dilemma. That's a moral burden, and we see Star and her family placed under that burden. In many ways, as a function of the particular social identity that they have within our society, and that was one of the big takeaways that my lenses brought to the fore for me.
Well, now I want to take a philosophy class and talk about the book in that lens.
No, I never took a philosophy class as an undergraduate student, so take advantage.
Yeah, I did, but it was certainly not that exciting. So
right.
Now I want to be in your class, Mike. I guess
thanks, Kate.
Yeah, I guess I'll go next. So I had kind of two big sociological takeaways from this book. The first would be the way that Thomas writes the book and writes about all these choices, as Mike was talking about, that Star and Khalil and everybody else and her family are having to make, really fits well with the idea of the sociological imagination that we talk about in my field. So Thomas really paints a story where every single one of these individuals' choices are embedded in the larger social structure. So a lot of times we think about, oh, an individual makes a personal decision, that's on them. They made it because this is how they feel or want to be. But from sociology, we understand that we can't even think about the individual without embedding them in their larger social structure, right? So here I am as an individual, but I've got all these social forces, and I wish I had a whiteboard I could draw this on, right? The choices they're making are tied to their economic situation, the institution of the government and education and institutionalized racism. And this all shapes the opportunities and choices that they can make. So when the book dives into, I'd say especially choices for Khalil and Devontae about dealing drugs, it's not just about them making that choice, right? It's that they feel forced to make this choice as the best option based on where they are in society, right? And what opportunities they have, which are shaped by our larger social institutions, right? If they had better educational opportunities, better economic opportunities, didn't live in a place with institutionalized racism, this would probably not be the choice they make. So I really loved how Thomas helped us see what sometimes looks like a personal trouble. What am I going to do? And instead helps us frame these choices that they were making as public issues related to larger forces. So that was my first big takeaway. The second thing that I was thinking about, I think really broadly ties into the idea of the social construction of reality that we talk about in sociology. And there's different theoretical perspectives within the discipline. But one idea that comes from a symbolic interactionist perspective is this idea that we create our reality, we define our reality, and that we as human beings create definitions and create meaning, and that these meanings change over time. And the social construction that I was really drawn to, I think as a criminologist, was the social construction of gangs in this book. I teach a course every year on juvenile delinquency, and we talk a lot about gangs. And reading this, I'm so thrilled to teach juvenile delinquency in the spring, because I can't wait to bring this book in, knowing that so many of my students have read it. And Thomas really, I think, helps us think about how we've constructed gangs, and also, I think, allows us at times to really challenge that construction. So in general, right, when the general public thinks about gangs, right, we think about a group of people who are coming together and committing crimes and harm against their community, and we put them in the I would say the bad category. I know this is not a scientific term, bad category, but like that's bad, right? And this is always bad, and what they're doing is causing harm. But in The Hate U Give, we really see a much more complex understanding of gangs. And Thomas helps us see that for many people, entering into a gang is sometimes the best choice you can make based on your social position. And she also starts to, a few times, start thinking about what are positive functions of gangs. In the second part of the book, when the Cedar Grove King Lords come into the picture, right? When the institutions that should be supporting and protecting Star's family aren't, it's the Cedar Grove King Lords who come in and help them and have this really positive impact on Star and her family, and making them feel safer. And I think that we don't commonly see that image of gangs. It is something that some criminological literature does point to, so I was thrilled about that. The other complexity with gangs that I think comes out in the book, and the social construction of them, would be when Star's dad is talking about his theory about Hogwarts being gangs, right? That every house is a gang. And, you know, it's this, oh, it's my dad's theory, kind of, they joke about it. But that really, to me, gets at this idea that we've constructed gangs to be about certain groups of kids in certain communities doing certain things, and we reserve that term for them. When kids in other communities with other identities are doing those exact same things, but they don't get that label and they don't get stigmatized. And so for me, it was a real reminder of, although we have constructed gangs in a particular way, right? We've constructed and defined them in a particular way. There are real consequences, right? There are real consequences for Khalil, right? Who's not even a gang member. Let's also be clear about that, right? But he's been constructed to be a gang member. And in this book, it allows everybody to feel like it was okay that he was murdered, because we've defined him as fitting into this idea of a gang. So I was really, I just loved reading those sections about the social construction of gangs and gang members, and love the way that she teased out a lot of those complexities. Those would be my two main takeaways.
You know, it's generating a lot of thought in terms of media studies, which is part of what I study. I mean, like, I don't know if you all have been doom scrolling during these times. Doom scrolling, where it's like you can't not scroll like through Twitter or Facebook, and just like the dumpster fire that sort of like is the world right now, because of the pandemic, because of the recession, you know, because of the spectacularizing of violence, right, against Black people, that gets circulated and, you know, re-traumatizes, right, Black users within those spaces. And just at like a personal level, opening up Twitter, which is also a place where a lot of people get news, this book is really resonant for sort of like helping to account for how, you know, Blackness is mediated digitally, and sort of Star's ambivalent sort of radicalization. You know, it's not something that she should have had to do, but sort of happens through talks with Maverick, right, her father, realizing that her pain is shared, right, by people who, like Mike said, like make Khalil into a hashtag, you know, and a racial justice project, like her attorney as well. So it's just at like a personal level, how can you not confront, you know, some of really like the representations that we get in this book, just on a day-to-day basis in terms of the media that we consume. and that people have different lived consequences, right, for consuming that media, you know, and the consumption of Blackness and Black suffering online. And one thing I was thinking of in particular with this book, in terms of media studies, that really becomes important, and it's influenced by Black women authors, especially, like Bell Hooks, obviously, right, Angela Davis, obviously, Sarah Jackson, Relina Joseph, Aisha Durham, Patricia Hill Collins, right, from Black Power to Hip Hop, that really influential text, talking about the importance of studying race, gender, and class together, especially when we talk about mediating people's experiences, and how they're not just, right, different components, right, of a person's identity, but they all affect one another. A really clear example of this that I was thinking of is how Angie Thomas in an interview had said that, you know, she was writing about Star as sort of like literally like a star witness to violence, like Mike is talking about with the moral dilemma, and how it contrasted with the media representations of Rachel Gentile, who it was the friend of Trayvon Martin, who was the last to talk to him before he was murdered by George Zimmerman. And she testified, and every major news outlet said, you know, that she somehow hurt the case, right, because she didn't code switch, right? She didn't switch into sort of Williamson vernacular, right, instead of Garden Heights vernacular. And how tragic it was that people would probably listen more to Star, a fictional, right, account of a Black female witness, than one that we actually have, right, circulating in our media, which is Rachel Gentile. So I just, yeah, summarizing that, I mean, it's media thinking about race, gender, and class together, and I think this is a really good text to do that.
So Marnie, you brought up the personal. So because we know that a disciplinary lens is only one piece of the entire lens that we use to kind of understand and see the world and engage with the world, I'm wondering what other lenses or identities were really present for you as you were reading the text? And did these lenses or identities enhance, challenge, or complicate the way that you read the text through your disciplinary lens?
Well, I guess I could start by saying that one of the things that's interesting as a philosopher to approach this, and as personally for me, and the two kind of come together here, is thinking about, you know, how universal is this text? And universal, right? Like how much could anyone share in kind of identifying with and relating to and imaginatively embedding themselves in this story? And, you know, there's kind of a rosy idealistic picture of literature as something that can bring us all together and put us in each other's shoes, and it's, you know, kind of very universal and anyone can feel the force of the struggle. But, you know, as I was saying earlier with this idea of unequal moral burden, there's a way in which I was constantly reminded, wow, I feel really white as I'm reading this book. Wow, I feel really like cisgender and male. Wow, I feel really middle-aged as I read this book. That is one thing for being someone that's not, you know, this is technically though I think it goes way beyond that readership, but it's a YA novel, so it is targeted for people younger than myself. So that's one personal way in which I was dealing with it. A few moments that I really loved that really brought it out in smaller ways, less dramatic ways, but I think really telling ways, were some of the discussions, which was great because they would often do this when it wasn't just Star and her family, but also they would have some of her white friends, often her white boyfriend in the picture as well, was moments when it kind of highlighted some differences between pop culture that people of color might engage with in a certain way versus white people. So, I mean, one was just the example of the birthday party, where when they bring out the cake for Star's brother, they sing a different happy birthday. It's Stevie Wonder's Happy Birthday, which is from this great 1980 album. And I looked up the song. If you haven't looked it up, you should look it up. It's great. And like Star, you know, remarks how I think it's maybe her boyfriend's maybe the only white guy there. No, I think there's maybe some other white folks there are just bewildered. They're like, what's happening? What are they singing, right? But all of the, her family and all of the people of color, her neighbors are, get right into the song. I teach about music. My writing 101 this semester is about pop music, and the ways in which we can share in that culture or not share in that culture, and ways in which we can kind of regard each other's pop cultures from a distance or not such a distance. And I love those moments because it really, and her boyfriend was kind of a stand-in for me, like going, wait, what? I thought that was really great. And it was done in a way that I think was very frank, but also very welcoming. The book never made you feel at any point like, you're not welcome. This book is not for you, reader, right? It does let everyone in, but it doesn't try to present some false reality where we all come together in some group hug and everyone shares everything equally. No, there are real differences from in just our day-to-day pop culture lives by our different being situated in different identities. So that's one thing I really came away with. I mean, I could talk about other lenses. I'm a father, so I definitely had that lens going there too. Mostly in thinking about ways in which I have to cope with being a father with my sons in ways that look a little bit like what Star's parents have to deal with, but also so many things that Star's parents have to deal with that I will never have to deal with, right? Again, due to that difference in identity, as a white parent of white children, there are just things that I'm not going to have to navigate that Star's parents do. So I could go on and on about that, but I'll leave that for later.
Well, I guess I will pick up on Mike's point there. The other lens that I read this through is just my lens as a mother of a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old. And I think especially reading it during COVID, where I haven't had school and childcare, right? That like I'm with my kids morning till night since like the end of March. And so it was even more central, I think, that identity. I didn't have my like time to read this away at PLU in my office. I'm, reading it while I'm constantly being interrupted by them and asked for snacks and all of that fun stuff. And so for me, just the relationship between Star and her parents was so central to me. And I kept thinking, right, throughout my time reading the book, what does it mean, right, that I'm not forced to have these same conversations with my kids, right? I can and I should, but I'm not forced to talk to them about how to interact with the police, right? Because of their skin color and because of my unearned white privilege, and that I get to talk to my kids about the police on my own terms, right? And that it's not a life and death conversation that I need to have with my child or my children at a really young age. So I kept, as I'm reading this book and my children are running around me, I just kept thinking about the ways that racism in our society shape how we parent our kids and what conversations are considered to be must-have with your children.
I think for me, the positionality of a white woman and white womanhood, and how you only really get that position historically and structurally in the U.S. In antagonism, right, with Blackness, especially in histories of feminism, right, and female empowerment, where oftentimes, like Bell Hooks talks about, like white women would conspire, with white men, against Black and Indigenous people to secure their sort of freedoms, right, that are enshrined. And so I've been thinking about how in this book, especially, the Haley character, a white friend who is cloaked in white innocence and always has the presumption of white innocence and never is even the little bit accountable up until the very end, in public discourse now, I feel like I see a lot of white women say, oh, that white woman's a Karen, you know, instead of realizing that you have like those voices, right? Those voices of that kind of antagonistic white womanhood within you, and that make you sort of an embodiment of policing in your everyday life. And so you really need to be thinking about how you embody that position, you know, that's been historically provided for you, and commune with those voices, you know, and be open to being accountable.
So some of the things that that I heard folks talking about as they were describing how they approached the book through a disciplinary lens and through a personal lens, some of the things that really stood out to me were this idea that the choices that individuals make are normally and typically situated within a far broader social context that really heavily impacts not just the individual choices they make, but the options that they have. And that's kind of connected to this broader sense of how we construct identities and how society constructs identities, and the ways in which society constructs the groups that we place ourselves in. And I was also struck with this idea from Dr. Rings around the moral and ethical dilemmas that folks make, and really looking deeply at the dilemmas that Starr and her family have to struggle with, at least in part as a result of their racial identity, and in part in way that their community has been constructed over time. And of course, the personal lenses that people look at the book through, whether it's a parent, whether it's a white person, a cisgendered white person, people of privilege, people of advantage, that all of those come into play when we are thinking about the experiences of these characters that we're reading about. So we're now going to transition to part 2 of this discussion, where we kind of talk more a little bit about just how we interacted with the text, to have more of kind of a free-form conversation.